I'm Kim Moy. Um, I am one of the organizers of UX+Data. When I'm not doing this, I am a senior design manager at Capital One. And I don't do this alone, organizing this meetup. I have two amazing co-organizers. Bill Prickett is one of them. Bill has his own post-production company, Prickett Media, and he's the one who records our events and edits them so you can all share them with your friends or rewatch our events later on. And Bill's you see him in the video there. And then we also have Matt Weber. Matt is the VP of Product at Development Guild, which is a great consulting firm for nonprofit organizations. And Matt, you want to wave hi there? Oh, there's Matt. And I want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, General Assembly, who's been with us for quite a while, and they've generously helped us with these virtual events, providing us with the ability to host all of you on Zoom here. And I'm going to pass it off to Lauren for a moment to share a bit about General Assembly.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Matt, for having us be involved with the UX+Data meetup virtually. It's always so much fun working with you all. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Rogers. I'm an events producer at General Assembly. A little bit about GA. We are a global and tech educational company. We have folks learning with us on a full-time and part-time basis. And then, of course, we offer free programs throughout the week. Our next thing that's really coming up is we have a Design Week conference next week. So highly encourage you all check that out. I'll put a link in the chat. And yeah, thank you so much to Kim and Matt and Bill. Just happy to be involved.
Thank you so much, Lauren. We're very grateful for your support. So something we still like to do to connect our community, as we did when we were in person, is allow anyone who's hiring tonight is have you post in our Zoom chat box with the prefix hiring in all caps with information about the role that you're hiring for. So you can include your name, the company that you're hiring for, the role that you're hiring for, and then your contact info. And if you have a link to that role, please include that as well. And then if you're somebody who's interested in that role, go ahead and contact that person directly. We'll collect all of those afterward and then send out that to all of you and to our whole community so everybody can see any of those open roles. After Nikkia runs through her talk and she and I have a little bit of a chat, we will also have a Q&A. So if you have a question at any point during the talk, during the conversation, please go ahead and put your question in the Q&A section at in the Zoom screen, and I can go ahead and ask that question during the Q&A portion of the evening. So I think that covers our housekeeping. So now I'll go ahead and introduce Nikkia. Nikkia Reveillac currently leads the research team at Twitter, where she is focused on helping to tackle the company's biggest opportunities for growth with compelling customer-centric insights and developing and inspiring high-performing teams. Prior to Twitter, Nikkia spent many years at Colgate-Palmolive Company, where she developed a reputation for being a visionary in insights with an affinity for innovation, impact, and action. So please welcome Nikkia.
Thank you, Kim. And I'm really so excited to be here. I wish that we could all be together so I could see your wonderful faces, but what I haven't said in front of me are these amazing people that put this together and invited me. So I want to start by thanking you guys. My pronouns are she, her, and if after this conversation you want to connect with me, I am going to make it easy for you. Same handle on Twitter as well as on Instagram. And so maybe we could dive right in. I'm going to share a little bit about myself, and I think it's important simply to set the stage. And I think the context is helpful also because you'll understand why I view the world of research the way that I do, simply because of where I've come from. So let's click to the next slide. Thanks, Kim. So, you know, I put this slide together for my interview for the job that I have at Twitter, and I thought it would be a wonderful thing to sort of share with you. It really does give light or put a light on the multicultural way that I sort of approach life and problem solving. But you hear an accent, I've kept it because it's amazing. I'm kidding. It's not like more amazing than anybody else's accent, but I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, these beautiful twin islands in the Caribbean. And if any of you guys are Trinidadian or know of Trinidadians or know of the country, you know that there's this melting pot of ethnicities because of our very rich history. The other thing that you should know about me is perhaps because of my Caribbean background and, who else knows why, I am fascinated by people. I think I have some friends or colleagues on the call who can attest to this. When I was younger, people would just say, she's super nosy, but I think it paid off, right? Like it ended up leading to a career in just like being nosy. So people fascinate me. Culture, I am endlessly inspired and intrigued by it. And I think it's very much a hallmark of Trinidadian Caribbean style to be inclusive and to want people to feel, happy in our company. The next thing is, I'm a mom of 2 young girls, and interesting that like I said this a year and a half ago, I'm saying it again. It's super tough, and it's become even more so in the time of coronavirus. But one of the things that really sort of drives me is the mantra that my mom left me with pretty much every day when she sent me off to school. And it was this idea that the sky is the limit. And I think the last thing that you should know is that I have this non-conventional start to my career in that I danced professionally. So for a few years between undergrad school and my grad school, I taught dance, I performed professionally, and I think it was and has been this outlet for my creativity. So, I have this sort of tapestry that makes me me, but it also has fueled a lot of the thoughts that I have around business and strategy and the way that people come together in teams, etc. So let's click to the next slide. I'm going to just share a little bit of my professional background. Again, a slide that I took from my interview presentation. Not laziness, just completely convenient. So, as Kim said, I spent many years all over the place with Colgate. And I share this because so much of the view that I bring to Twitter and to tech it feels novel, it really isn't novel. It's how companies like Colgate, who've been around for years and years, approach innovation, opportunity, space identification, and problem solving. So let's move to this next slide, which I think is the cornerstone of what I want you guys to orient your minds to. Many of you guys work in spaces where you are looking at a problem either by yourself or with a team that needs to lead to a solution. And in the world of tech at Twitter, the solution is some sort of product or feature. And we believe, as do many, that a great product is a combination of things. It's not just one thing. And this isn't even the laundry list of things that a great product is made up of, but for the purposes of this discussion, we will say it's structure, the content, and the customer experience. And I think if you're here, you're probably looking at that last one saying, yep, it's customer experience. So let's click to the next slide. This is a little bit of a journey, and a journey that I've been on since starting at the company at Twitter a year and a half ago. We know that those are the things that make up a good product. However, because we are Twitter and we have access to all of these tweets where people are able to explain what they love and what they hate, we know that there are a lot of things that people feel and customers experience that aren't being considered, and that were historically not considered consistently and fully inside of the product development process. And I include a tweet here just as an example of somebody saying, hey, I want to be able to pin a tweet that I want to, seen every time somebody looks at my profile. Would it be great if we had the ability to include many more? And they they add Twitter design to sort of signal to us, make a change. So there's no shortage of comments. So the question is well, what happens next? So click to the next slide and I'll explain to you what I inherited when I joined, which was a view of coming to the solution that wasn't necessarily integrating this feedback consistently, because this field called user research, user experience research, while nice on paper, in practice, the people who were on that team were not being consulted until the very end of the process. So a typical product development process should include a little bit of intuition mixed in with what we bring, which is an evidence-based point of view, which is made up of a distillation, I suppose, of facts from data, but also insights from, any manner of discovery tools. But what was happening, and it still happens, and it's very prevalent in tech, is I have a vision. I am, product person X, or I have an idea, or competitor Y has launched this and we need to do this. Engineer builds, the design person will say, well, let me make it look nice. And then research, called user research when I started, really comes in and, vets whether or not it is shippable, right? It wasn't about leading the process. It was very much at the very end. And data science, again, I'm being very transparent, was a little bit of an afterthought, right? Like help us understand behavioral data, but it wasn't being used in partnership with the research that you get to understand what people really need and feel and aspire to be able to inform teams of all of the opportunities that we could ideate and come up with solutions again. So that was the status quo. So move to the next slide. This is a change that you may be like, well, this seems obvious. And this is the crux of the talk, right? This is the crux of the conversation Kim and I are going to have. User research was part of the problem in that when tech was born, you needed a group of people to just sort of assess whether the user in that moment of usage was being delighted and what their experience was. But at the end of the day, we were more than users, right? That moment that we're on our phones or we're, brushing our teeth, it's a tiny slice of a bigger life that is diverse and complex and nuanced and complicated. And the more that we understand that ecosystem around the individual, the more we're able to build better for them. And so that was it seems very simple, but we lobbed off the name user. Internally, we call ourselves experience research, but really, I see the function as being even more expansive. It's more than research. If anything, it's the insights and the strategy that then gets shaped because of the insight. So maybe the next time I come and talk, we'll have another name, but that was a thing that we did that was fairly simple early on to try and start changing the narrative internally. And so I'm going to share with you the mission and vision for Twitter research and some challenges that we've experienced. And then I'll end by sharing some ideas for how we've overcome those challenges, all with this eye on trying to get us away from we're a pair of hands that will come in at the end and validate and assess an idea that has already sort of manifested in somebody's mind to we're here to shepherd the insights and the understanding of humanity that is so necessary for people to have in their pockets in order to build better. So the next slide is our mission, and I'll read it for you. Don't steal it. If you steal it, I'll come find you. Okay, I'm kidding. I'm not going to be able to find you. I can't see you. But as strategic business partners, the Twitter research team delivers actionable, customer-centric point of views that enhance the quality of business thinking and decision-making across strategy, product, policy development. The words strategic business partners are in bold because at the end of the day, that is part of this journey, to move away from a transactional relationship with our various fields, to a partnership mindset. But we needed to sort of put it out there so that it was aspirational, but also something that we could start to work towards. So from that flowed what we believe is an equally inspiring vision. If you could get to the next slide, Kim. And that is that if we do our jobs well, we'll become this insights engine. Again, notice that the words are choiceful. Like, I didn't put research engine, that helps make customer centricity a competitive advantage for Twitter. And so we were very purposeful. We, meaning me, I didn't do this alone. I have an exceptional team of research leaders who are, I was going to curse, but I'm being recorded, but just kicking butt. Because you can put something on a piece of paper, but the other challenge is just like living this business partnership mindset every day. So I'm proud of them. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And I'm going to share now in the next few slides some of the challenges that we have to overcome. And feel free to drop it in the chat if you feel like some of these challenges resonate or are relevant for you. And it doesn't have to just be like your company and your function, but it could be you, the individual in your team trying to make change. So if we click to the next slide, challenge 1, old perceptions die hard. I think, a lot of tech and, Twitter for sure is part of this. As I said earlier, the practice of user research felt new, right? It was, well, I have an idea, I've built a thing, an app, an experience, and I need to make sure that this blue button is engaged with more than this white button. I'm making it very, very, very simple, and it's never this simple, but that was the genesis of this practice. And so here we are coming in trying to say, actually, let's open the aperture. Let's think bigger about what research can be. But this is a thing that you had to tackle, I had to tackle, we have to tackle. Next slide. The second challenge. We've gone from, again, as Twitter's matured, we're 14 years old, a whole teenager right now, a few stakeholders to many stakeholders. And with more partners comes more problems or challenges. The reality is that in order to really convert an entire company to begin to obsess about knowledge of people and what they're doing, how they're behaving on the platform, why they're doing what they're doing, all of those things, we need to liaise and connect with and build bridges with a variety of stakeholders. And so the team needed to become more than just researchers. We needed to become negotiators and sociologists and psychologists and therapists in order to flex to meet the needs and meet the conversational needs of an engineering crew, a marketing organization, data science, product. And so not an insurmountable challenge, but a challenge that we noted pretty early on. And the third one, which again, this is if you've wanted to know the inside of how things work at Twitter, the next slide, I think, gives you a lot of visibility, but this is what it looks like. And you could see that we have this staff of people who report up through the CEO, Jack Dorsey. And then we have research and we have data science, and we're separate. And so the onus is on us to have these conversations and to connect the dots. But again, it's siloed. And so that is another challenge or opportunity that I want to share with you guys that we really had to overcome in getting to this vision. So how did we overcome these challenges? Maybe next 2 slides, Kim. The first was to think beyond the user to the person. We know this, as I said before, you do not show up in life as a user. You show up in life as a whole person, and many of us fully formed adults. That was a joke because there are some people who are not showing up as fully formed adults, but we'll save that for another conversation. But we couldn't just talk the talk, we had to walk the walk. So our research plans and the way that we're executing against problems and questions has become much more expansive and holistic. Very similar to the way a consultant might approach a problem when they come to a client. It is when you think about what it is you're trying to achieve, there's internal experts, there are your actual users, there's the data, there are academic experts, there's literature. And so the more that we could do to sort of say, there are several things that we could be gleaning insight from outside of the people who are tweeting at us, the richer the discussions, the more intellectual the debates, and the range of ideas and concepts that we might want to put out into the world to assess will become much more diverse and interesting. So that was one way of overcoming this. The second, if we go to the next slide, is again, super intuitive. Researchers, and this is not unique to tech, love research, right? And people who love data, and people who are analytic in nature. And sometimes those feelings about your craft overcome the desire or override the need to reach out to other people. And so you may be doing good work, but it's almost as if I were to come to you and say, look, I built a great product. And then you'll say, but like, did you talk to the finance person to see whether it was like feasible and like we could afford to? Did you talk to the engineer to ask if you could build it? And so the idea that we introduced to Twitter was very simple. One that I borrowed from my first boss and mentor at Colgate, and it's the I wish I knew, basically IWIC for short. at the beginning of every project, what we try to do is to say, you know what, before we run to solutions, let me just bring my friends to the party. I'll bring my admin assistant, I'll bring my finance friend, my HR partner, someone from marketing, someone from sales, someone from product, data science, the whole slew of them. And then you ask the question, what do you wish you knew that you don't currently know? And what it does is it opens up the conversation. So one, many people feel included and invested in the success of whatever it is you're about to do. Two, it creates an energy similar to what brainstorming and ideating does. People start to build off of one another. Oh, that's a good question. Had you thought of? Three, it avoids duplication of effort because you're already bringing everybody to the table so they know who's leading what. And I think it addresses the challenge that I illuminated earlier around the various stakeholders. So before, you'd have to like do the work and then go find time to talk to this person, etc. But by simply bringing people together at the start of the process, seems so simple. You alleviate a lot of that tension. All of a sudden, time is not an issue as much, and you have people who are enriching the process with the thought-provoking questions needed to make sure that you're doing the right homework up front so that you're increasing the likelihood that whatever it is you put out there will succeed. Okay, so the last thing that we did, and this is 3 out of 100 things that we've done, but for the purposes of just sort of speeding ahead, I'm sharing 3, was to ensure that we were developing and delivering what we call a connected research point of view. So this is a thing that anybody here could do. It is skin in the game. It's moving beyond the, well, I did the work to the, here's what I would do if I was running the show. And again, if anybody on my team is on this call, they know that the last question that I asked them in my tips of the week was, if you were to start Twitter all over again, what would you do? So it's a provocation that moves you from the siloed, boxed nature of work that you're doing, a project, a point in time, to a, oh no, I actually have to make a recommendation that people have to feel compelled to act on. And so it's sharpened the narrative coming out of Insight's work in a way that has led to much more traction, much more energy, much more excitement because of that whole feeling of move beyond a recommendation to like, what would you do? Okay, so one last slide. And I saved this one and then we let Kim ask me anything. And I'm curious as to whether people are hating this or, okay, actually no. I hope that you're enjoying it, but if you have questions, you know, I know that Kim will make that happen. But this is the biggest thing that has been a mantra of mine for a decade or so. And that is that at some point in your career, you are focused 100% on your technical expertise, doing the work, becoming someone who understands the ins and outs of whatever it is you do. So if you're a researcher and you're a quantitative researcher, understanding survey techniques and all of the pitfalls and downsides of you know, working with data, that's your place. Qual, you go to school to become an ethnographer, really, you know, pushing out on your moderation skills. If you're a data scientist, all of that stuff is technical. But at some point, particularly when you start working inside of larger organizations, it becomes more important. And the number on the right is just an exaggeration, but it's one that provokes conversation within the team. At some point, the work around the work becomes more important than the work, because you can have an artifact, a piece of research, a beautiful set of slides that you put together that nobody cares about because you did not take the time to understand who was in front of you, whether or not they had tried that idea already, whether or not they have a particular hang up about, you know, data in general. And so the more time that we can all as professionals spend understanding the people with whom we need to interact and influence, their personalities. Am I, you know, somebody who prefers graphs versus like visuals, and the politics of the team and the organization that you're on, the more that your work shines. And so, you know, it's part of the journey for sure of moving this team towards the vision of being business partners, because so much of the work is nuanced and soft. It is gaining entry into spaces perhaps where you didn't have a seat at the table before. And then once you're at the table, like figuring out exactly what to say, how to say, when to say it, and when to push back. It's all part of the work. So we're still on the journey, though we're much closer than we were when I first joined, in that many teams are showing up with this co-founder mindset and this vision of having research really kind of start the conversation. Here's what we've unearthed. And I saw good words there in the chat from discovery, curiosity, impact, depth, all of that stuff. It actually is all of it, not one thing, is what's sort of being trickled down through it. It does not replace intuition. We're still very intuition based. I mean, we have a bunch of founders in the company. And so our job has been very much to say, yes, your intuition counts, but let me help you sharpen it with some insights. Okay, so now I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikkia. This is great. And I'm sure people in the audience, if you have questions, please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. But I do have a few that we can start off with. One of the things, since you mentioned it on this last slide here, starting off with speed and conviction, right? I think there's a lot of ways we can talk about speed. There's what we could consider unsolicited feedback. Potentially you're getting that constantly, right? Almost every second, both positive, negative. How do you balance using the power of the crowd that comes through the platform itself with using the platform intentionally to gather feedback that you want specifically for what you might be working on?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. I think this goes directly to the heart of partnership inside of the team. So I think the good news is that there is an understanding from the moment you join the company that while you are going to get pinged constantly and DM'd constantly by people saying, hey, like I need to be verified, or, there's this feature problem. There are people inside the building who are customer service, if you will, their Twitter service team members that will be responsible for really collecting all of that noise. We have the data science team that is constantly monitoring the behavioral data on the platform. But we also work with companies that use our own data, like Sprinkler, and ask them to help us with sentiment analyses around certain topics. And then, of course, we come in pulling back, saying, yes, you're hearing all this noise. However, what is the business objective that we're all going after? Because if we were to really just listen to everything, we wouldn't be focused. There would be no priorities. And so it's usually on us and the folks that are in my team to sort of pull back through that I wish I knew process to say, what is it that we wish we knew? Let's collect that thematically, together prioritize. Yes, you're hearing these sort of million tweets, but if this is what we all agree to as being the number one thing to solve for, relax for a second. I got you. You could forward all the tweets that you got, all that noise. I'm going to work collaboratively with Twitter services, with my data science partners, and come back to you with a little bit of a signal inside of the noise. And so we're hearing it too. There's all of that balance, but I do think it boils down to the relationship and the ability that the research team has to be able to influence and push back and say, don't get distracted by the shininess of the noise. Let's focus. Let's come back to this document where we agree that these three things are the things that we need to solve for.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then so once you've figured out what that prioritization is, what that number one thing is to solve for, and you're going to come back and use the platform intentionally to gather additional feedback. And I've seen some examples of that on Twitter around Twitter Spaces, for example. Can you speak to what the mindset is behind that and what you're trying to accomplish there, what you're looking for, and what the approach is there?
Right. Like, so this is with regards to like learning in public.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So for those of you guys who are here and don't know, Twitter Spaces is an audio extension of the timeline. So, we tweet, we use words to convey thoughts, but also to respond to others' thoughts. But one of the things that we'd observed for years and years, so this is not new, is that when you think about human beings and connection and communication, so much gets misinterpreted when you're just reading a text. And so we needed to find some way to bring nuance to the conversation. And so therein lie the space's opportunity. Honestly, this notion of learning in public and being, very open about failures in public and being very transparent about plans in public starts from the top down. It's very much a philosophy that Jack has about how we build. And it's a new muscle for me to just be like, well, here's my plans. And oh, by the way, I failed on this. And so I'm acknowledging that, but seeing that this team that's been responsible for working in public, I think has done several things right. But one of the most important things that they did was to be really transparent in the communication about this that happened in the conversation. So let me try and describe it to you. Imagine all of us here are really experimenting with Zoom. And you're telling me, Kim, like, you seem a little grainy, Nikkia. I, as the researcher, will be like, thank you for letting me know. Can you make sure that you go to, at zoom.com and give feedback? So we had somebody inside of the space who was collecting the feedback live, but we also started off with 300 beta participants who we coached and said, look, as you are hosting spaces, make sure that you are also delivering feedback to them. So it was akin to, in your organization, choosing a few people to train to be moderators or facilitators. We couldn't do it alone, so we turned to the crowd. We were very selective in choosing people who were part of what we deemed marginalized communities and people who identify as women, because we knew that they were the ones who were getting disproportionately more harassment on the platform. And so we were like, well, this space could be a safe space for you, but here's the heavy lift that you'll have to do, which is collect feedback. And yes, things will be buggy. And so it's been a humbling experience for me, because what we lose, we gain a lot in speed and timeliness of feedback, but what we lose is the ability to say, hold on a second, let me stop, talk to an academic here, do some more research, dig a little bit deeper, perhaps launch like a version of it and see what that works, how that works. We lost a little bit of that, but I wouldn't give it up for anything, because it is probably the best in class example I could think of a team working as co-founders quickly and making really decisive decisions in public.
And so when you share those insights publicly, there's obviously a sense of transparency there. What kind of impact do you think sharing publicly has on the perception of Twitter, and how much do you actually care about that perception?
Well, I mean, so perception is a heavy one, because there's like the brand perception that Twitter has that was honestly shaped by certain people on the platform, certain events on the platform. And it's constantly, I think, a marketing job to remind people that movements have been born on the platform, from Me Too to Black Lives Matter, et cetera. And so, there's that reminder that a brand's perception is informed by a multitude of actions. So that's one thing. There was one perception that we were slow, and it's true, we were slow. It took us a long time to innovate for a variety of reasons. So we've already seen in our global user survey that these measures, these little metrics are moving, right? So there's a perception that there is momentum simply because we have been talking about it a lot. And I think that's really interesting. Simply talking about the work, despite the fact that the work hasn't actually hit anywhere, has created this impression that there's work. And so I take that as a lesson for my career. And I think you guys should too, right? That at the end of the day, perception is reality. And so spaces is one thing that we're doing in public, and people are like, wow, we have access to leadership. These teams are just like here, like working all hours to hear us. You're hearing the researchers' voices. Usually that would be reserved for like a session that nobody else had access to. And here we are literally listening, saying, tell us more. And so it's like an empathy. The whole EQ thing is like we're revealing our insides on the outside. And I think that's going a long way to addressing the speed perception reinforcing the fact that like we're a transparent company in tech. And the humility side of the equation is there too, because you will see us in spaces and in press talk about the fact that like we're not ready yet, but we welcome feedback and we know it's buggy, but we're working on it, that sort of stuff. So I'm hopeful that when we look longer term, because some of these impressions take a longer time to change, I'm able to say more confidently that this work in public meaningfully drove certain other perceptions. But right now, it's all kind of qualitative.
Yeah. I'm going to just stop the share because it might be easier. People can actually see us a little better. I wanted to follow up a little bit more on that. So as you're doing that research, how much does it and how does it inform the roadmap that you're following? And maybe you can also share some examples of what's to come based on the research that you're doing.
Right. Okay. So again, the slides that I shared should hopefully help give you all context. And I imagine that this is a thing that many people face in their own organizations. There's still a bunch of things that are on the roadmap that are from ideas that people have had. And then there are other things on the roadmap that are simply getting us to a place of having a more solid foundation. So it's not breakthrough innovation, it's just sort of like incremental fixes. And then there are some things that are happening that have not yet led to a product on the product roadmap, but is sparking up conversation. And that's just all of the work that we talked about that is overcoming some of the challenges that I observed when I entered, taking effect, manifesting, and change. So two of the things that I'm excited to share, that again, there's nothing yet on the roadmap. Don't get excited. Don't go tweet this. One is an exploration of Black Twitter. Black Twitter in popular culture is like a phenomena. People talk about it like it's a real place. However, it's lit. It is. There's fire. There's action. It's amazing. They will build somebody up from like a person on the street to like a mega brand, and they will tear you down just as fast. And we never really did the work to one, segment the Twitterverse, and two, knowing that Black Twitter is sort of like an entity, go deeply to understand what it is that Black Twitter is about, what makes it special, what are the needs, what have they been clamoring for. And so that has been a subject of inquiry and discovery, and has led to some insights that, if you're kind of in the know, you're like, this is not surprising. But for the company, it was like, this is incredible. And so we're in this process of going from the knowledge share to what do we do? How do we co-create? And so a tangible implication of that is we don't have a product yet, but we're making sure that every time research is done, we include a cohort of people who are Black Twitter users. Simple. So more to come there. Stay tuned. Nothing yet. The second is teens. A growing cohort for sure, and one that we don't understand completely, despite the fact that we were just there. And 2020, I think, changed the game for social media on so many levels. And so the big question is, well, what are they doing if they're on Twitter? We use jobs to be done theory religiously in the company. So what are they hiring us for? What are they firing us for, and why? And really understanding those things within the ecosystem of competitive products, so that we could then ask ourselves, well, do we need to do anything differently? Should we build something specifically for them? Or are they a source of inspiration that we really need to pay attention to? So that's an example of, I guess, the spectrum of build it because we need to fix it. A little bit further down the road is, this is an idea that we already kind of had because it makes intuitive sense, like enabling you to thread tweets. And then on the other side, there is the total blue sky, new opportunity. We have no product yet. And inside of all of that, there's some acquisitions. And if you've been watching the news, I think we've acquired, I don't know, it feels like 20 companies in the last 6 months, but that's also part of it. But it's not net new ideas. It's ideas along the roadmap that would be better served by acquiring a company wholesale to help us get there faster.
So what is something that you feel like you've tried that didn't work? When you think about the challenges that you encountered around research, that, you mentioned that there are many things that you tried, and you just gave us three examples that have helped move your team forward. What are some of the things that you tried that didn't work?
That's a good question. This might sound funny, but like one of the things that got us fired, not literally, but like going back to the jobs to be done framework, the thing that had started to happen at the company is that the quality of the insights and recommendations that we were bringing were falling flat, right? So when we would deliver these points of views and still not have traction, I think I was like, well, this is interesting. It was only when I sort of pulled back that I realized that they weren't provocative enough. And so it's not a full-blown, like there's a thing that we did that failed. It was an adjustment. It was a recognition that there's much more appetite for breakthrough, provocative points of view than I thought. And so as long as it's couched in, this will help us get to our goals, we have permission to be as provocative as we need to be, which is why I shared that I've been asking the team the question, in developing your point of view, ask yourself this: if it was your business to start again, if it was your business to run, what would you do? Because we often are so safe. We're worried about our jobs. We want to get promoted. We're like, well, the research said this, and I'm like terrified to like make the inference to this. But the more that you could say, I did the work, I've done the analysis, this is what it's saying, but I understand business too. And I'm going to provoke a conversation and say, well, why don't we do this? That is the thing that I found to be most magical, not this sort of like, ginger, one step here, two step here recommendations.
It's really interesting, because I could also see like going for provocative could walk a very dangerous line, where it being provocative for the sake of being provocative, just to get those insights to be listened to.
100%. And it goes back, you see, everything I say goes back to EQ. So if you've done your homework, right, and you know that like this person is somebody who tends to be a little risk averse, maybe what you need to do is more of the upfront, well, what happened in the past? Like, what is the constraint that you're working with? Let's go together to, the CEO or whoever in the C-suite to really understand, do we have permission to sort of break the mold and adjust accordingly? So what I'm recommending is the experience that I've had, where we're at a juncture where it's like the people who are risk takers, the people who are not terrified to say something, are the ones who get rewarded. Those who are timid, and by the way, I'm not suggesting that you get loud and as animated as I am, but I do think finding creative ways to be mindful, to be thoughtful, and to tailor your provocation in a way that makes you comfortable, but still causes people to say, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's the key. Spend the time doing that and you're going to go far, I think.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's great advice. I'm going to shift to we have a bunch of questions now from the audience. So I'm going to shift to some of those. We have a question that asks, can you speak to why you think research as a discipline has to spend so much other disciplines with about its value? And I think that's speaking to where ultimately does that resistance come from? Why do you even have to start from the point of shifting the mindset the way you had to do from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is driven by a culture in tech, but it's not just tech of, there's a power dynamic, I think, in functions. And when I was in CPG, the function du jour, the one that sort of had the track, was marketing, right? And so, the decisions sort of landed there. There was a general management path, but you had to be in marketing to sort of be on it. And so even without the organization saying you are the chosen people, we are incentivizing subtly this perception, this continued dynamic where, you know, one person sort of leads, even though the expectation is that we kind of come together as a squad. And so that is the same thing that I encountered here. It's really just a subtlety. And I think the other thing that I observed is that because researchers were user researchers who were used to sort of being called upon when they were needed, nobody challenged that authority, right? And so, you know, a product person would be like, well, this is the vision. And then, you know, there was a maturity gap that is now shifting. And so I think in general, if you're in one of these technical fields that are providing a service, and I don't like the words request or service, but you are sharing knowledge to help empower a team to make better decisions, the onus ends up being on us to sort of not acquiesce, but tailor the way that we approach every situation in a way that allows us to be heard. And I could fill in researcher with woman, right? Or, you know, woman of color, minority, literally, I think that is a dynamic in human society that exists where, you know, if you are in that power construct, not the one with the power, you have to kind of do some flips. Yeah. I look forward to the day when that's not necessary, but for now, it requires a ton of emotional intelligence where you are like, okay, I see what you're giving me. It feels like rejection. You remain stoic, you smile, but you find a way forward that allows that person to sort of say, okay, I see you have an opinion. I want to hear you, but certainly it's also a part of my lived experience, which is probably why I found EQ to be advantageous for me navigating my own career.
Well, let me just follow up on that and ask you, because you put so much value in EQ in order to succeed, and it sounds like to help the organization succeed, how are you actually looking for that on your team and as you hire for that?
Yeah, I have transformed the discussion guide off the phone screens to be focused on behavioral questions. So, you know, assuming you make it through the first screen and the second screen, the idea is that the questions that are asked by the panelists that we select are going to be everything from, you know, what's let's get a census to your communication skills. Let's understand like your technical capabilities. But inside of that, the questions are framed very much in, so you have a recommendation from work that you have just done that is not well received. How might you deal with that? Or how might you overcome it? Or can you tell me about a situation when you were in front of a bunch of people who were anti-research and had to convince them about the value of what you were doing? Talk to me about it. And so it is very much the way to understand whether somebody has grit and resilience, understands how to flex their communication style, is somebody who, in the face of ambiguity, still persists, and somebody who's self-aware. So that's one thing. And then, of course, on the inside, it's just been a ton of training, bringing in executive coaches who understand how to work with a team of people who may be afraid to push back, afraid that like saying no will be received as this person doesn't want to be on the team. And then also just like leave behinds, cheat codes. You know, like a tips and tricks. So one of the first documents that I wrote for my team was the art of pushing back. Because people are like, well, how do you do it? Right? Like there's no, but like, how do you like do it over Slack? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I bet everybody on this call wants that, that cheat sheet. So let's move on to another question here. How do you leverage multiple data sources, so internal or external interviews or tweets, while also moving quickly and not having projects span over many months?
So the way that we've been approaching that lately is developing what we call parallel paths of plans. So there is still, because we're on this journey, we're not where we want to be yet. We have not achieved our vision. The need to say to teams that are working quickly, we're here, right? So where we can spare it, there is like a person who's inside of that cross-functional team, like Spaces, who's just like in the trenches, right? They're a tiger team working really hard together. Alongside that, we will say, well, remember that I wish I knew session that we did where we unearthed these bigger questions? We're going to continue to work on those things alongside that effort. So it's really difficult for one person to sort of do both, the big strategic foundational stuff and the sort of more tactical reactive speed stuff. And so we're trying our best to balance that by having different people work on both sides of it. So the more junior folks who come in as interns or new grads would handle that sort of usability work, and people who are more tenured would be focusing on the more strategic work. In some cases, we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the resources, and so we have to make a call. And in those cases, we are actually just tending more to consultants or external vendors, because we still don't want to give up the fact that we're on this journey and we're doing strategic work. So one is, if we had the money, we would have 2 people or the resources. 2 is we outsource where we can. 3 is we push back and prioritize and say no.
And when you, because this was also another question, the I wish I knew sessions, do you have a tangible outcome or output really from those, such as a brief, or is it really just the brainstorming session?
Yes, it is tangible. So the second step is, after all the questions have been gathered, the researcher, working in partnership with his or her data science partner, will start to group them by themes. And then they come back to the same group saying, all right, well, here are the themes. Let's talk about like what the priorities are. After that, there is what we call this cross-organizational insights roadmap that's developed, because there are going to be, let's just take one question around brand safety. There'll be elements of that question that have to do with talking to experts in the ad regulation industry. There'll be elements of that that are very much focused on doing some deep research with advertisers to understand their perceptions. And then there'll be elements of that that require us to work with our revenue science partners who have been collecting data for years and years in that space. And so what we do is to put a plan to answer those questions. So it's almost like a template where on the left side is prioritize questions, and on the right side is the how, the methodological combination that helps answer those questions. And so that team has this nice repository now of the full questions, thematic groupings, prioritized questions, and then the holistic sort of cross-organizational plan, because the plan can't be executed by one group alone. We need to sort of pull people together.
And how often do you go back to like a previous document or session once you've already had that?
Well, it's a living, breathing document.
So you refer back to the same
yes,
document.
Exactly. So, I mean, if we're doing our jobs well, you're seeing questions with a strike through because we've answered them. And we're sort of using that as our like planning document. So if the discussion, as an example, happened in September, October for the year to come, that becomes that individual sort of, guiding plan of work. But it's subject to change as priorities in the organizations change, which they often do.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a question. It says, what surprised the company about Black Twitter?
Ooh, let me see. I can't see the question, but I think that, Black people and people of color who were in the know were not surprised, right? They were like, this is obvious. I think for many folks, like in the engineering org, they didn't realize how much of a movement Black Twitter is and how powerful that collective is in shaping culture, right? And I think that was sort of like the big thing. Just if you can go to people who are in Black Twitter, and really it's like, if you're Black, you're in Black Twitter, I learned. At the start of doing scoping research, you can get a very interesting point of view on things because of the way that they've leveraged the platform differently from other cohorts. One of the things that was surprising, those people were like, well, what's so special, right? Like, there's all these different Twitters, and that was our response. Our response was, yes, and we're going to continue to learn about LGBTQIA Twitter. We're going to learn about feminist Twitter. We're going to learn, but this is the kind of work that hadn't been done because of those circles. User research was only there to assess features. And now we're like bigger than that. We social scientists and game theorists and anthropologists and all the gists on the team who are specifically brought in to help educate the company around some of these bigger questions. Who is on Twitter? Where, who are the power players? How does like Black Lives Matter, a movement started with a hashtag. So really trying to understand the connection between the movements that form online to offline. That's like a whole other area of inquiry as we delve into this notion of what is community and how do you form community? Ooh, UX+Data, online, offline, and in between.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think in another direction of community, how do you go about researching for features for a global product when the way that people communicate can vary a lot across different cultures?
So one of the things, my team is global, and while a lot of the work has been US centered, global participation, which is what we call this initiative to enter emerging markets much more seriously this year and next, is exactly what we believe is necessary. The research is necessary to understand how to do it well. So as an example, Niger Twitter, right? This is Nigeria Twitter. There's a presence for sure that Twitter has on the ground, and it's being used by activists and startup founders and entrepreneurs more heavily. But what we don't understand is just like, if we were to really do justice to serve that population, perhaps we need to find ways to develop a low bandwidth version of the platform, just given the realities of like, the telecoms industry and access to data. So the way that we're doing it is less feature specific and more service specific right now. But like Black Twitter, our hope is that by deeply understanding people and culture in the markets that we want to prioritize, there may be some ideas that are unearthed that we hadn't considered that are good for that country, but good for all. So, we're taking baby steps.
So, in that shift of going from research to the whole customer, are there examples like that where you're able to use and prove that shifting to the whole customer changes how you end up designing the product to the point of more provocative insights? Do you have examples that prove your point of using the whole customer and being more provocative at the same time that help produce a better product? Did that come through?
Yeah, it did come through. And I think I haven't been here in this role long enough to have seen it come to fruition where we've thought holistic and it's led to a solution, maybe with one exception. And I hesitate to talk about it because it's like bad memories, but during the elections, the team my team of health researchers, and we call health anything that has to do with misinformation, toxicity and abuse, understanding marginalized communities, privacy, social justice, those things. They tend to focus on product surface agnostic things that cut across the platform. And so this whole issue with misinformation spreading like wildfire was something we were aware of and doing deep research to understand, like why does negative news spread so fast, right? Like, what is it? And there are certain things that we discovered, right? Behavioral science tells us that in order to really create cessation, you need to have small nudges, right? It's not like a cold turkey thing. They're nudges, the theory of nudging people. And so there was that. And then the other thing that we had unearthed, again, because of their work, was this idea that clickbait is a real problem, right? Just like clickbaity things that get forwarded. And we had that data to see that like people would see an article, never open it, retweet it. And so that was all kind of part of this like misinformation, misleading information, like team's work. And that led to the nudge that happened, and it's still on the platform. Did you read it? Are you sure you want to share it? Like, did you read it? Yeah. And we've seen through the data an increase in people opening and a decrease in people sharing without having read anything. So that's a result of the work that we've done. The other one led to a nudge that wasn't necessarily well received. And I'm not going to talk about that one, but again, we labeled as much as we could.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea that like we're trying to create incentives to encourage good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior, but it's all coming from a body of work that is very much led by the health research team that's studying just humanity and like why we are the way we are, why we love gossip.
Yeah.
Basics.
Yeah. It's like thank you for sharing all of that. I think that's really interesting. We have another question that asks, Joanne asks, I noticed that a key team is missing or hidden on this co-creation, the legal team. I'm wondering what role legal I assume plays in the product lifecycle, especially with the contentiousness of Section 230 and its potential impact on Twitter's product direction.
Yeah, no, that whoever sent that, fire. Good observation. So I'll distinguish between like product innovation, where we tend to leverage the health teams that sometimes include policy, legal, the researchers, obviously the designers, in product development process, regardless as to what we're working on, because there are health risks that need to be understood. And then there is policy development. And we treat those developmental cycles differently. And so when it comes to policy, similar to product, there is the same shift that needs to happen where the legal team and the teams responsible for writing policy and all of the rules of engagement and the terms of service are working from not just a place of legality and intuition, but mostly legality, but what do people want? So a simple thing that's happening, and you guys, I think, can actually go to Twitter and submit recommendations if you want to, because we're truly open source, is nobody's reading our policies. So when you break a rule and your account gets suspended, people are like, I don't know what I did. And so the opportunity that came from research is, well, first of all, just think about human behavior. When you're in it, you're in it. You got to make it easy, front and center, for people to understand what the rules are. So clicking out of the platform to go to a separate page is already creating like, a dissonance. Secondly, and you don't need research to tell you this, legalese and things that are written not for the average man, it just goes over your head, right? And in a world that is becoming much more visual and movement and image and video based, text heavy content, it doesn't get read as much. So make it user friendly. And so legal is there doing their own thing. We've had to kind of get them more obsessed with research so that they understand that in optimizing that content, we should probably do a mix of the same thing that I've been saying. Intuition, this is what we want to say. This is what we believe we need to say. These are our values. And like, here's what people need, and marrying those two things together. And then on the product side, we do invite legal, but I could do a better job of putting a bubble with legal's face in it.
Yeah. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, Nikkia, so I'll just have a couple more questions for you. We have here, since we're on kind of, you mentioned how legal is involved. Also, how does product respond to research and researchers sharing this stronger point of view?
So real talk, I think it was a shock at first, but I did my homework behind the scenes to say, this is coming. We heard you, because I did a lot of listening tours, just trying to understand what people wanted and what they perceived of the function. But when research and the team started to say, well, this is what we think you should do, by and large, it was well received because they were like, great, like you have an opinion. It doesn't mean that it was acted on, which has led to this, and I did not share it here, this new 2021 thing that we've been doing, which is surround sound insights. It's moving beyond this perception that your journey is done when you share your results. Mm-hmm. I did it. Like, I had a presentation. Your journey only ends when like you've debated it, you've had working sessions with your team, you've been like, okay, here's what we learned, but here's what we do. And so that's been the thing that we've been working on to really get the organization to embrace the point of view and not see us as, well, we did the work, but we're partners alongside the journey. And I think in teams where I have folks who are emotionally as intelligent as they can be, like really doing what they need to do to understand their stakeholders, I'm seeing more of this co-creation energy. It still hasn't made its way to the product, but like when we have staff reviews where people come and give updates, it's been night and day. You could tell that the teams are, showing up as a team. You don't really know who's the researcher versus the designer versus the strategist versus they're just all obsessed about the same problem.
Yeah, that's I imagine it'll continue to evolve and change over time. You had also mentioned that you could see that maybe in a few years, the team might have a different name eventually. Where do you see experience research moving toward in the future?
I think that it would be wonderful if we became the insights and strategy team within the company. Because at the end of the day, the word research, to bring it full circle to the first question, is the thing that we're doing, but the value that we're extracting is insights. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something provocative about just calling the function the thing that you're getting. It sends a different message. It also removes the language of do research. This person's going to do which signals a little bit of a transactional form of engagement to a let's all together extract the insights. Let's learn together. Yeah. And then strategy, that's been an interesting conversation internally. At the end of the day, because we are pulling back and saying, what is the problem we want to solve and how might we get there? And what's our point of view for us to, achieve this? We're operating very strategically. And so I think we'll end up being more of that arm in the company. It's happening so quickly. It could be, by 2022, if you and I talk, I might be like, we did
it. What stopped you from just adding the name Insights now?
Whoa. Well, baby steps.
Sure.
Baby steps. We are still design and research. And, a lot of people have pride in the word research. And I do too, to some extent. But I've made like a gazillion changes. And I don't know who, again, I know that there are a couple of people on my team, including Robin, and I think I saw Reg. Mountains of changes. And so just like the I Wish I Knew session that some of my friends from Colgate who are on the call know about, it was a matter of me pulling back and being like, there's all of this stuff that I could work on. What are the three few things that I could have a real impact on? And so the name was a small thing. I also published a Words Matter document where I was like, here's some words we're never going to say. Request, support. Yeah, so I didn't share that, but yeah, it's been a lot of educating, which has been fun and sometimes exhausting.
I can imagine. So I'm going to end on this question from Juan. What's the best answer you have received to the question, what would you do if you could start Twitter again? And I'm going to add on to that and ask what your answer to that question would be.
Oh my gosh. I think that I would have an edit button.
I know a lot of people would be happy to hear that one.
Right? It's the bane of everybody's existence, but there's like reasons there. I would make for a more dynamic infrastructure on the back end that allowed us to more seamlessly integrate some of the new features. So right now you look at the timeline and it's still the timeline of yesteryear. And part of the reason why it is that way is just because of the tech infrastructure against which it's built. And so if I was starting over, I would find some way to work with the engineers who understood how to create, because I can't speak to that language at all, but like something that was more dynamic. So as we built spaces, as we included more voice capabilities, it felt more organically part of the experience. I think the other thing that I would do is to work with game theorists and people who study behavior because we've created some bad habits like the endless scroll and the like button that even me, as somebody who understands what it's doing to your brain, will look at the like counter and be like, why don't I have more likes on this UX+Data event? So those are the things that I would have brought in, not necessarily done differently, just knowing that like social media, this ecosystem, we are shaping the way people feel about themselves.
Yeah. Are there any answers that you've heard from others? I think that was the other piece of the question, that you've heard from others that you feel like were great answers to that.
Like if we could build it over, what would we do differently?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I have heard inside of the company is, starting off with the ability to have longer form as in more character tweets at the beginning, and training people to, so that's one, training people through some sort of like community guidelines upon entry, upon onboarding, so that there was better behavior going in. And so, you just sort of enter and then you're kind of left to it. And I think some of the new apps in recent years have done a good job being like, if you're signing up for this, like, here's some things you need to know about how we operate. And we don't really have community guidelines. So I think I would agree, because I hear this a lot. Community guidelines to start off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll end on that question. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our community, Nikkia? I'll let you end there.
Well, first of all, I have to, express my deep gratitude to you, Kim. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for being such a fantastic facilitator, and everybody else on the panelist call and the screen that you guys can't see. I appreciate you. I'm grateful for you. I would end by saying that if you are at a point in your career right now and you're looking for a change or you're feeling uncertain, don't be afraid to take the risk. Let the risk move you. Let the fear move you, and reach out. It doesn't have to be me. It could be anybody on LinkedIn. It could be anybody on Twitter. You would be surprised at how many people are ready to talk to you about their journeys, their jobs. They may not be able to offer you one, but I would encourage any of you guys who are like, oh, I'm super curious about the field of whatever, to reach out. And then I'll extend that same feeling to me. I make myself available. I may be busy, but I'm always down for a conversation. So you know where to find me, on Twitter or on Instagram. And I wish all of you guys nothing but the best, and look forward to meeting some of you guys in person someday soon.
Thank you so much, Nikkia. This was so much fun. It was such a pleasure to be able to have this conversation with you. So I'm very grateful for you spending this time with us tonight. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. We'll ask you to save the date for our next event on Thursday, April 8th. We will have the CEO of the video presentation app. And so we hope we will see you then next month. Until then, hope everyone has a fantastic night, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, Nikkia.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Happy spring.
You too.